I need to check the use names list and then write the story. Names already used: Cassie, Derek, Linda, Michelle, Nora, Patricia, Becca, Ryan, Marcus, Sloan, Gerald, Waverly, Gloria, Theo, Grandpa. New names I'll use: Ivy, narrator Fried, Cole, husband, Renee, mother-in-law, Jess, best friend Allie, Donna, Vadimu coordinator. I almost didn't tell anyone this story. Not because I was ashamed of it, I wasn't, but because for a long time just thinking about that night made my chest do this weird tight thing, like my body still hadn't fully decided whether we were safe yet. But we are, and now I want to talk about it. My mother-in-law Renee called me a gold digger 11 days before my wedding, not to my face, obviously, to her book club. Her book club, which included her neighbor Janet, whose daughter went to college with my coworker Priya, who texted me a screenshot at 7:14 on a Tuesday morning while I was still in bed eating cereal. I stared at that screenshot for a long time. Cole was in the shower. I could hear him singing. He always sings in the shower badly, confidently, something that used to make me laugh. That morning, I just sat there holding my phone, reading the words over and over. She only wants him for the security. You can tell. She doesn't come from anything. She wasn't wrong that I didn't come from much. My parents split when I was 9. My mom worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood. I put myself through community college and then transferred to finish my degree while working 30 hours a week at a hotel front desk. I saved for 2 years to have a real emergency fund before I let myself stop worrying about money every single day. But I loved Cole before I ever knew what his family had. I loved him when he was a grad student living in a studio apartment with 1 pot and a futon. I loved him when his car broke down twice in the same month and we had to take the bus to our first anniversary dinner. I loved him because he's the kind of person who, when you're crying at midnight about something that isn't even that big a deal, sits down next to you on the floor and doesn't try to fix it, just stays there. I put my phone face down on the nightstand. Cole came out of the bathroom with his hair damp and his glasses a little fogged, and he said good morning like it was any other morning, and I said good morning back, and I decided I wasn't going to tell him. Not then, not yet. I had learned early on that Renee required careful navigation. She wasn't loud about her opinions. That would have been easier. She was quiet. She was the kind of person who said things like, "I just want what's best for Cole," in a tone that made clear she had already decided that you were not it. She sent him articles, long-forwarded emails about financial planning and compatibility and red flags in relationships with no subject line, just the foreword. She called him every Sunday at noon, and if I answered, she was perfectly pleasant, and if he mentioned I was there, she'd say, "Oh, how nice." And then somehow the conversation would last 45 minutes. When Cole proposed, she smiled and hugged me and said she was thrilled, and something in her eyes said the opposite. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was being sensitive. I stopped telling myself that around the time she started helping with the wedding. The venue was the first thing. We had chosen a place in the hill country outside Austin, a restored farmhouse with big oak trees and string lights and a wraparound porch. Exactly what I'd pictured. Renee had opinions. She thought the deposit was too high. She thought the catering was overpriced. She suggested once, then twice, then a third time a country club in her suburb, 40 minutes away, where she knew the events coordinator. I said no, politely, every time. Cole backed me up. Then there was the guest list. She kept adding people. An uncle I'd never heard Cole mention. A neighbor couple from when he was in middle school. Her college roommate who had, as far as I could tell, no ongoing relationship with anyone in the family. I kept saying, "I'll see what we can do," because I didn't want to fight. And then I'd talk to Cole and he'd say, "Just tell her no," but he also wasn't the one making the call, so. And the dress. God. She asked to come to my final fitting. I said yes because Jess, my best friend, my maid of honor, the person who has seen me through every bad decision I've made since we were 19, gave me a look that said, "Don't." But I overruled her because I was still trying. Still hoping we could find some version of this relationship that worked. Renee stood in the corner of the bridal shop with her arms crossed and her head tilted slightly to the side, and she said, "It's lovely, Ivy. I just wonder if it's a little much for a farmhouse wedding. My dress was not much. My dress was simple, off-white clean lines, a small lace detail along the back. The seamstress looked at me. I looked at Jess. Jess looked at the ceiling. That night, Jess said, "She's not going to stop. You know that, right?" I knew. But here's the thing about me. I'm not a confrontational person by nature. I grew up in a house where conflict meant someone leaving and not coming back for a while, and I learned young to be careful, to smooth things over, to not push too hard. It's something I've been working on in therapy for about 3 years now. This tendency to manage instead of address. To keep the peace at the cost of myself. I was still managing Renee. I was still trying. And then came the Thursday night, 9 days before the wedding. Cole was in Denver for a work trip, a 3-day conference he couldn't get out of. I was at our apartment, going through the final vendor checklist when my phone rang. It was Donna, our venue coordinator. Her voice was strange. "Miss Ivy," she said, "I'm calling because we received a very concerning call this afternoon. Someone identifying herself as Cole's mother contacted us and stated that the wedding had been called off. She asked us to cancel all services and refund the deposit to a credit card she provided." I sat down on the floor. I didn't decide to, my legs just stopped working. "She said she was calling on Cole's behalf," Donna continued, "because he was traveling and couldn't call himself. I want you to know that we did not process anything. I had a note in your file, your instruction from our first meeting, that any changes to the booking had to be confirmed by you directly, in writing. That's the only reason I'm calling you now instead of you finding out on your wedding day." I don't know how long I sat there after I hung up. Long enough for the apartment to get dark. Long enough for my phone to light up with a text from Cole asking how the checklist was going and for me to not answer. Here is what I want you to understand about the next hour. I did not cry. I wanted to. The tears were there. I could feel them right at the back of my throat. That specific pressure that means you're about to lose it. But something underneath the grief was harder and cleaner, and it pushed the tears back down. I picked up my phone and I called Jess. "She tried to cancel the venue," I said. 3 seconds of silence. "Okay," Jess said. "What do you need?" This is why Jess is my person. Not, "Oh my God," or "Are you serious?" or even "I told you." Just, "What do you need?" What I needed was to think. So we thought. Here's what I had: Donna's call, which she'd already documented internally, the note in the file about my instructions, and the phone number Renee had called from. Donna had it logged in their system because she'd flagged the call immediately. Here's what I didn't have: proof Renee knew it was wrong. Proof she understood she wasn't authorized. A recording. "She'll say she was just trying to help," Jess said. "She'll say she misunderstood. She'll say she misunderstood. She'll say Cole asked her to handle it." "I know," I said. "So you need her to say it herself." I thought about that. I thought about it for a long time. I called Donna back that same night. I explained the situation. I asked her if she would be willing to do one thing for me, just one thing, and she said yes before I even finished asking. She had a daughter. She understood. The next morning, Donna called Renee back. She told Renee there had been a problem processing the refund, that she needed to verify a few details, that she was so sorry for the confusion, she just wanted to make sure everything was handled correctly. You know how these things get complicated. And Renee, who was so certain, so untouchable, talked. She said she'd been trying to handle this quietly for Cole's sake. She said the marriage was a mistake and the family knew it. She said she'd hoped this would give Cole a way out without a scene. She said she'd been watching this girl. This is how she said it. This girl. Trying to lock her son into something he wasn't ready for. Donna recorded the entire call. Then she emailed me the file. I listened to it 3 times. The 3rd time I was completely calm. I made a cup of coffee and I sat at the kitchen table and I listened to my future mother-in-law explain in her own measured, reasonable voice exactly what she thought of me and exactly what she'd done. And when it was over, I set down my mug and I thought, she has no idea. She had no idea I had the venue coordinator on my side. She had no idea her call had been flagged and documented the moment it came in. She had no idea that the policy she'd tried to use against me, the same policy I'd put in place at our very first meeting because I was thorough, because I came from nothing and I had learned to protect what I had, was the exact thing that saved my wedding. She had no idea that Donna had kept her talking long enough to capture all of it. And she had absolutely no idea what I was planning to do at the rehearsal dinner. I want to be clear, I did not enjoy the planning phase. I'm not a person who likes confrontation or drama. I cried twice that week, once on the phone with my mom, once in the car in a parking lot outside Target, for reasons I still can't fully explain. I was sad, not just angry, genuinely sad because I had tried so hard to build something with Renee and she had looked at me the whole time and seen someone to manage instead of someone to know. Cole flew home Friday afternoon. I picked him up from the airport and on the drive home I told him everything. I played him the recording in the driveway of our apartment building and we sat in the car with the engine off for about 10 minutes afterward. He said, "I'm so sorry." I said, "You didn't know." He said, "That's not good enough." That moment, that one moment, right there, I want to hold it somewhere safe because it is one of the most important things that has ever happened to me. Not the apology exactly, but the way he said it. Not as someone making excuses or minimizing or explaining, just, "That's not good enough." As in, I should have seen this, I should have been paying better attention, you deserved better from me. He asked what I wanted to do. I told him. He listened to all of it, then he said, "Okay, let's do it." The rehearsal dinner was at a nice Italian place in downtown Austin. Renee had actually planned it, which in retrospect is funny. Long tables, low lighting, the whole family. Cole's dad, who is a quiet man who mostly stays out of things, his aunt and uncle from Houston, a few cousins, our friends. My mom, who had driven up from San Antonio and who was already watching Renee with the particular expression of a woman who has survived harder things and knows exactly what she's looking at. The evening started normally. Drinks, appetizers, the breadbasket, the usual low hum of a family gathering. Renee was gracious. She made a little speech welcoming everyone. She touched my arm twice. She called me sweetheart. After dinner, Cole's best man was going to give a short toast. That was the plan everyone knew about. What only Cole and I and Jess and Donna knew was what came before it. Cole stood up. He clinked his glass. Everyone turned to look at him with that warm, expectant look people get at rehearsal dinners, all smiles and anticipation. He said, "Before we get to the toasts, I want to say something. A few days ago, I found out that someone I love and trust, made an unauthorized call to our venue coordinator. This person represented herself as acting on my behalf without my knowledge to cancel our wedding. I want to be very clear that I knew nothing about this call. Ivy knew nothing about this until our venue coordinator called to warn her. And I want everyone at this table to understand what actually happened." The room went very quiet. Cole's voice was steady. I had expected him to be nervous. Cole gets nervous doing presentations at work. He overprepares. He practices. But he wasn't nervous. He was calm in the way I had been calm listening to that recording. Underneath it, clean and hard. He didn't play the recording at the dinner. We had decided that together, it felt like too much. Too public. Too humiliating in a way that would make other people uncomfortable rather than clear-eyed. Instead, he described, factually and briefly, exactly what Renee had done. What she had said. What her intentions had been, in her own words. Renee's face, across the table, went through several stages very quickly. First, a small, controlled smile, the one that means, "This is a misunderstanding, I will explain momentarily." Then, something that flickered across her eyes when she realized the room was not moving toward her. Then, the stillness that comes right before someone understands they have miscalculated. Cole's dad put down his fork. Cole's aunt looked at Renee. My mom, at the other end of the table, folded her hands in her lap and said nothing. Cole said, "Mom, I love you. I will always love you. But what you did was a betrayal of Ivy and of me, and I need you to hear that from me, in front of our family, because I am not willing to let this become something we manage quietly. Ivy deserves better than quiet management, and so do I. I did not cry. I had promised myself I wouldn't. Not there. Not in front of everyone. I made it until about 45 minutes later, in the bathroom, with Jess's arms around me, both of us kind of laughing and kind of not. Renee did not respond at the table. She sat very still. After a long moment, she said, "I think I need some air," and her husband walked out with her, and that was that. Nobody chased after her. That was the thing. At the kind of family events I grew up watching in movies, someone always chases after the person who storms off, and the drama follows them out into the parking lot. Nobody did that. Cole's aunt refilled her wine glass. One of the cousins gently steered the conversation somewhere else. My mom leaned across the table and squeezed my hand. The wedding was 6 days later. It was perfect. Not in a magazine way, in the way that real things are perfect, which means a little chaotic, a little imperfect around the edges, and exactly right. The oak trees caught the evening light just how I'd pictured. The string lights came on at dusk. My mom walked me down the aisle because she was the one who earned it. Renee was there. She came with Cole's dad, and she sat in the front row, and she did not cause a scene. I had not expected her to. She was too controlled for that. She cried during the ceremony, which surprised me. I don't know what she was crying about. I'm not sure it matters. Cole cried too. He tries not to, but he always does. He stood at the end of that aisle with his face open and his eyes wet, and when I got to him he took my hands and said, very quietly, "You look incredible," and I thought, yes. This is it. This is what I was protecting. The reception was loud and warm and full. We danced until the venue staff started very politely stacking chairs around us. Jess gave a speech that made half the room cry for real and the other half laugh until they couldn't breathe. My mom danced with Cole's dad, which I did not expect and which I am still thinking about. Renee and I did not speak privately that day. We took the family photos and she stood where she was told and smiled when she was supposed to. At one point, she looked at me from across the room, and I looked back, and neither of us said anything, and I think we both understood something in that moment. I don't know if we'll ever be close. I'm realistic. What happened doesn't unhappen. But here's what I've thought about in the months since. She underestimated me. That's the core of it. She saw a girl who didn't come from much, and she assumed that meant I was soft. That I was managing my own fear instead of building something real, that I would crumble when pushed. She didn't know that I had spent my whole life getting careful about the things that mattered to me. She didn't know that I'd sat in a lawyer's office before we even booked the venue and asked every question I could think of about contracts and authorization and what could go wrong. She didn't know that the same instinct that made me put a written confirmation clause in our venue contract was the thing that saved everything she tried to take. She didn't know Jess. She didn't know Donna. She didn't know who was already in my corner. And she absolutely, fundamentally did not know Cole, her own son, as well as she thought she did. That is the part I hope she sits with. I'm not angry anymore, mostly. I'm something more complicated than angry. I'm the version of myself who stood in a bridal shop and swallowed a response and smoothed things over. And I'm also the version who sat on a kitchen floor in the dark and decided that smoothing things over was done. Both of those people made me what I am going into this marriage. Cole and I are in our first apartment together now. We moved right after the wedding. New place, fresh start. We've had 2 arguments already about whose responsibility it is to replace the toilet paper roll, which feels correct. We went to therapy together for the first time last month. Not because things are bad, but because we decided early on that we didn't want to wait until things were bad. We talked about his mom. We talked about his mom. We talked about my patterns. We talked about what it means to build something that doesn't depend on anyone else's permission. I think about Donna sometimes. I should send her something. Flowers, a card, something. She didn't have to flag that call. She didn't have to document it. She didn't have to call me back that night instead of just processing the cancellation and letting it become my problem. She did all of that because she looked at a note in a file I'd put there, and she thought, this woman was careful. She deserves a warning. That's all I ever wanted. Not special treatment. Not to be handed anything. Just the chance that comes from being careful, from paying attention, from preparing for the worst while hoping I wouldn't need to. Renee thought she could use my carefulness against me. She didn't realize it was the only reason her plan failed. And Cole, my husband, the man who stood up in front of his entire family and said, clearly and without flinching, what you did was a betrayal. He knew. He had always known who I was, even when I wasn't sure I did. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the revenge, not the recording, not the moment in the rehearsal dinner when the room went quiet and Renee understood. I come back to that car in the driveway, engine off, the recording finished. That's not good enough. 4 words. In a parking lot, at 9 o'clock on a Friday night. That was my wedding gift. Everything else was just the party. I've thought a lot about what actually made all of this possible. Not the recording, not the venue coordinator's note in the file, not even Cole standing up at that rehearsal dinner. Though all of it mattered. What made it possible was something that happened years before I ever met Renee. It was every time I chose to be careful instead of careless. Every time I asked one more question instead of assuming things would be fine. Every time I protected something that mattered to me before anyone told me I needed to. Renee looked at that history and saw smallness. She saw a girl who came from nothing and assumed that meant I had nothing to stand on. That's the miscalculation people like her always make. They confuse the absence of privilege with the absence of strength. They see someone who has had to fight for ordinary things and they think, soft. They don't understand that fighting for ordinary things for years, quietly, without anyone watching, is exactly how you build the kind of person who doesn't break when it actually counts. That's not luck. That's not fate. That's just the math of how a life adds up. What you do in the small moments. The contracts you read carefully. The questions you ask when nobody's impressed by the asking. The times you protect yourself even when it feels paranoid. Even when people around you roll their eyes. All of that accumulates. It becomes infrastructure. And when someone comes along and tries to pull the floor out from under you, they find out it's concrete. Jess knew who I was. Donna, a woman I'd met twice, saw my careful note in a file and made a decision to call me instead of just processing a cancellation. Cole, in a parked car on a Friday night, said 4 words that told me exactly what kind of man I was building a life with. None of those things happened randomly. They happened because I had shown up consistently as someone worth showing up for. And Renee, I want to say this carefully because I don't hate her and I don't think hate would serve me. Renee built her own ending too. Every dismissive comment, every forwarded email, every assumption she made about who I was, based on where I started, every move she made to quietly undermine instead of genuinely try, it all went somewhere. It didn't disappear. It accumulated the same way my carefulness accumulated, and it arrived at that rehearsal dinner table exactly when it was supposed to. That's what I mean when I say I think about cause and effect now. Not as some cosmic punishment system, but as something simpler and more honest. The choices we make become the lives we live. Renee chose, over and over, to see me as a problem to be managed. I chose, over and over, to build something real. Those 2 trajectories were always going to meet somewhere. I don't know what our relationship looks like going forward. I'm not a person who writes people off permanently. I've seen too many complicated people become better ones when they had reason to. But I know this, I will never again smooth something over to keep a piece that was never real to begin with. I learned that from all the years I spent being careful. The same instinct that made me put a protection clause in a venue contract also taught me that real security doesn't come from managing other people's comfort. It comes from knowing exactly what you're made of and building accordingly. Cole knows what I'm made of. That's the only thing that mattered in the end.